Hello everybody, we're back to talking design on Bitcoin. I had to take a break because of some health issues, but the design space in Bitcoin is evolving so fast this year that we just had to come back to work. For the fourth episode, we had the pleasure to talk to Craig Raw from Sparrow Wallet, one of my favorite projects in Bitcoin. Great for beginners to learn more about the protocol and amazingly useful for more advanced users that want full visibility when it comes to UTXO control. We talked about the origins of the Sparrow Wallet project, contributions, priorities, how much information to reveal to a Bitcoin user, privacy practices, and a lot more. Enjoy it. Hey Greg.
Hi there, Pedro.
How's it going?
Good, and you?
Pretty good too. Thank you so much for joining me on this conversation.
Sure. Is my sound coming through okay?
Yeah, your sound is coming perfect.
Great. Yeah, all good.
All right, I had to bring out the old microphone. I haven't recorded one of these for a while, but glad to be back in business.
Excellent. No, good, man. I was listening to your one with Rodolfo a little while back, so I have heard one or two of your previous editions.
Yeah, that was a fun one. It was the first one. I was very lucky that actually Rodolfo accepted to do that one without even knowing what it was for.
Nice.
So I know that we had scheduled a podcast a while back, but had a little bit of a health issue that disabled me from being able to record, but great to be here with you now.
Looking forward to the chat.
So you've released Sparrow Wallet a while back. I know that, for instance, Matt Odell has been really excited. He's kind of found your product out of nowhere. And I was wondering, how exactly did you came with a requirement for yourself to build such a thing? And what exactly were you using before that to interact with the Bitcoin network?
Sure. So back in 2019, I was trying to set up a multi-sig wallet, and having used a number of different wallets over the years, back to the sort of days of Armory, just, and at the time, Electrum was the kind of default go-to for a more advanced Bitcoin wallet setup. So I was, using that to try and set up a multi-vendor, multi-sig wallet. And I was really just battling to get it to work. We had the new PSBT standard, and we had HWI, which was just starting to come in then, which is the sort of interface, the sort of USB interface from a programmatic side. But what the sort of Electrum wallet didn't really have was an easy way to capture some of the details that the PSB format requires. Some of those details, like the master fingerprint and the derivation path. So, I was having a chat on the GitHub issues for the Electrum wallet, and trying to describe these various issues that I was having, and having a chat with the devs there. And, I just, great project, but I was just really battling to, sort of overcome, I guess, the sort of inertia that a UI that has been around for a long time has. They have a certain way of doing things, and I was suggesting some pretty large changes to their wallet setup wizard. And I've actually just gone back and read that old post, and it's still valid, I think. And when I sort of realized that they were unlikely to be moving forward in the direction that I was certainly interested in, that's when I began to think to myself, well, it's maybe required that we actually need a Bitcoin wallet that's a little bit more standards compliant in terms of the new sort of PSBTs and the way of doing things that it looks like we are headed towards. So that was kind of where it all began. And then I just decided, right, let's dive in and go ahead. And I kind of began by building a transaction editor, actually, just to try and sort of master, the sort of smallest unit, the sort of atomic unit of Bitcoin first. And then from there, it grew out into a fully fledged wallet. So that's the kind of origin of where it all began.
Can you talk a little bit more about what this transaction editor looked like? Was it just a command line, or did you have a little Java interface where you could edit the outputs and inputs?
No, actually, it's what you see in Sparrow Wallet today. When you view a transaction, when you sign one or whatever, it's sort of a graphical user interface that allows you to edit all of the fields in a transaction. So those things that like the RBF field, the lock time field, all of those sort of things, and also display the scripts so you could actually see what the script is rather than just relying on the wallet kind of doing that work in the background. I kind of just really had a strong interest in trying to not only understand for my own sake, but also just develop a tool that could allow the inspection of any transaction, to kind of get a feeling for what goes sort of into it. I was very inspired by the sort of modern IDEs that you get when you program, and how you can just see so much detail, and you can just keep going in and all the way down to like a very low level. You don't have to, but it's sort of the power that it gives you. I find, it just gives you a lot of confidence.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you say that, because every time I'm using Sparrow, one of the very kind of familiar experiences is the inspecting element in a browser, where you have like your beautiful website on the front end, and then you can quickly expand the editor and go element by element and deconstruct every element of the page by just analyzing the styles, the code, the markup. And I think it's such a powerful educational tool that you can just take on your own. But before we go there, I'm curious to understand a little bit of your interactions with the Electrum project, because I imagine that they're one of the oldest, more established projects in Bitcoin, and I would imagine that they became a little bit harder to evolve. And then I know that they were focused on implementing Lightning, so some of their priorities were a little bit skewed with yours from what it sounds like. But were you proposing new features, or just trying to add your own ideas to the project? And did they receive them with just like, that's not a priority right now? Or did they absolutely say there's no way we would integrate anything that would make the experience more complicated to the user?
Yeah, the way that I actually did it wasn't ideal, to be honest. If I'm being fair, so yeah, they were working on the Lightning implementation at the time, but that was only the sort of main dev there, and the dev I was interacting with was sort of doing all kinds of other things, and even though there weren't any releases of the wallet at that time, I think everybody who was interested in kind of running the more recent features was just running it from source. So that's what I was doing, and I was talking to him about the most recent source. So one of the things that PSBT requires is the use of these master fingerprints and derivation paths. So what Electrum did was develop a way to store those within the wallet, but there was no easy way to add them on the front end. So you could go and edit the JSON of your wallet file and kind of add them in the background, but you couldn't, when you were setting up your wallet using the wizard, add those things. All that you could do to add a cosigner, for example, was just put in the XPub. So I was talking to him about that. He was actually saying, he was kind of asking for suggestions on how to represent a cosigner in an output descriptor, which you actually can't do. You can't really represent a cosigner on its own, or there's no kind of default format for that. So we were both trying to address the same thing. In the end, I was kind of saying, well, I think you need to add a bunch of extra UI sort of fields or text boxes for this thing, and I think he was kind of more looking for a textual representation in a single string. But because there's no sort of standard for that, I don't think that there is even now. It was a case where we kind of didn't quite see eye to eye, and at that stage, I sort of realized his focus is not quite where mine is. I'm trying to develop something which not only allows you to capture those fields, but allows you to display them later afterwards. So they're not sort of hidden as some kind of And that's I think where the sort of idea, the sort of kernel of the idea of just trying to show everything to the user, so there's nothing about their wallet that's hidden from them, that's somehow in the wallet file but not in the UI. That's kind of where the kernel of the idea, and I think that's where Sparrow and Electrum are a little bit different. In that there's certain things that Electrum just doesn't show, probably because it wasn't originally built at a time when those things were around.
Yeah, I totally agree. But in a way, I'm kind of happy that Electrum decided not to go on that route, because I actually think that Electrum is a good third level introduction to Bitcoin wallets, because it's so kind of, I'm not going to say easy to use, but I would say that compared to Sparrow, it's a little less scary. But it's very interesting that Sparrow, with its exposition of so much information, it actually makes it very understandable. I actually think it really helped me understand Bitcoin a lot more. And I think it will remain as one of, I think, the wallets I use the most, exactly because it exposes everything. And I think in Bitcoin, and like everything else, you want to know as much as possible. I don't have a lot of experience with multi-sig, but from the experiences I had with Lily Wallet and Sparrow and a couple of other wallets, I really I really see it that it has come a long way. And I love the fact that, for instance, with your multi-sig interface, you actually see all the key stores. So as opposed to just showing that you need three or two signatures, you actually show all the details of what will be the key that signs that signature, and all the key stores with all the derivation and the fingerprints. They're very useful, because they're the only kind of feedback that you have to understand that your keys are actually properly interpreted by the software.
Yeah, I think there's a big what's the right word, sort of push towards making every wallet as simple as you can, because all devs don't like doing user support, and the more complex you make things, the more likely somebody is to ask you, how does this work, or what is this thing? But I think that when it comes to security and trying to secure funds, the way that has proven the test of time and to be more successful is that you actually have to show the details, and that there are no shortcuts when it comes to understanding Bitcoin and making sure that what you're doing is the right thing. And I think that it was really NVK or Rodolfo, one of the guys behind the cold card, who made that just so much clearer. The cold card is generally a wallet that shows you everything that it can. It really tries to display as much information about your hardware wallet. And I think that that's the reason why Bitcoin is like it so much, is the fact that it doesn't try to dumb things down. Now, there will always be a market for the sort of simpler approach. I think that that's always going to be a place for people to go, or at least where they want to start their Bitcoin journey. But I do think that as you get more into it, and as maybe your balance in fiat terms goes up and up, you really do want to understand what you're doing and make sure you don't make any errors. And that's, I think, where you need to be able to see as much as you can. You just don't want to have any doubts in your mind. And that's, I think, what Sparrow tries to do, is just inspire confidence by allowing you to go and check everything, go and make sure that everything is as it should be. If it's in the hardware wallet, you should be able to go and look at the same details there that you do in the software wallet, so you can compare the two and make sure that everything is as it should be. That's, I think, the kind of ethos that both the cold card and Sparrow are trying to work towards.
And I think that's even like, as we speak, I'm looking at the wallet. There's so much stuff we can do here, but at the same time, I would imagine that you would like to keep the UI somewhat clean and not adding too much stuff, because in the same way that the cold card doesn't add, for instance, a touch screen, because that would require so many more libraries to be supported. Do you have an intention of keeping Sparrow as as a default kind of is it you're using JavaFX or
Yeah, yeah, Java FX is a sort of UI
mm-hmm. So, yeah, so
framework. Yeah, yeah. Just on that thought, there are various things that you can do to, make a wallet, I don't know, more capable. And for example, one of the things Samurai Wallet does is it supports multiple script types off a single seed. So with that, you can, it will sort of be able to, when you send a transaction, be able to say, okay, well, I'm going to make sure that the if the address I'm sending to is of a certain script type, I will use the funds if I have them from the same script type. So that kind of allows a certain degree of privacy, which I think is good. However, the downside of that is that you have to kind of hide all of those details to the user. Otherwise, they have to deal with the fact that when I select a UTXO, and I'm going to have to concern myself with what is the script type, and there's just no wallet that I know of that forces the user to go that far down the path, because I think it would frankly be quite hard to use. So, to sort of explain that, I try to keep the UI of Sparrow pretty close to the kind of nuts and bolts, the kind of detail level, so you can really get a sense of what's going on. You can go and see on this particular address what are the UTXOs that are attached to it, without having to be too confused by, I'm supporting 3 different script types here, and every index has 3 different script types attached to it. I think that is not a model that fits what Sparrow is trying to do well. So there are these design choices that come along, and I think different wallets will suit different things. But yeah, that's just one of the sort of things that I have been thinking about, and that's kind of where I'm at this point.
yeah, it's so interesting using different wallets, how the software itself conditions your mental model of your own transactions. So as a user, I can tell you that when I'm using, obviously forced by the application itself, when I'm using Blue Wallet, for instance, all I can really think is in terms of total balance. When I'm using Samurai, I'm very confused what's happening, to be honest, because I know that, and it's very complex, because you have the whirlpool, you have the standard Samurai wallet premixes and stuff that's being mixed. Uh, But then when you move on to Sparrow, it's everything is so focused on the outputs that you can really clearly understand, okay, this is the Bitcoin I have, this is how it's broken down, this is where it lives, and this is how I can get it out of there, as opposed to just thinking in terms of just a general overall balance, or not knowing exactly what's happening. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, Sparrow is the number one use case for Sparrow is a cold storage wallet, and when it comes to cold storage, you don't want to have any doubt, in my mind anyway. You want to know exactly what are my UTXOs, what's exactly in them, what's exactly the script type behind them. All of the details, for me anyway, are super important when it comes to a cold storage wallet. Now, if I have like a mobile wallet and I'm just going to spend with it, which I think most people agree is probably not something that's on a layer 1 level anyway going to be around for very long, then I think sure, you can have a balance based sort of approach. But as I say, the number one use case for Sparrow is a cold storage wallet, and that's, I think, why I've kind of gone the way that I have. I just think that's the most important thing.
there's all kinds of services out there that offer Vault, and all they they market these parts of the service as here, put your Bitcoin in here and lock it in a more secure way. But you're actually, it seems that sometimes you're actually giving out more control than actually retaining more control. In a way, it feels like you're putting it in a safety deposit box somewhere, as opposed to when I use Sparrow, I feel like I'm accessing and I'm controlling my own safe in my own house, and it's fully sovereign, as opposed to all these experiences that I think there's still a big place for them, because I know that there are a lot of users that are just going to look at Sparrow and think, I don't, there's too many options, too many elements for me to control, and I'm overwhelmed. I need to go back to something where I just put in an address and a total of amount to send. But it feels so empowering to actually be able to see the nuts and bolts of everything and what's under the hood, as opposed to just giving out control to some other entity that controls that code that you will never be able to verify. And I think that's obviously very important, especially as you mentioned, when you're dealing with cold storage. I understand that nobody's going to be wanting to use Sparrow for transactional lightning day to day, and I think it makes sense. I actually think that the mental model of lightning, of only understanding stuff in channels and not necessarily having outputs, is really powerful, because it lets the user think in terms of total balances and not so much of, I don't want to move this UTXO because it's going to have other implications. I want to move these ones, but these ones have, like, they have more outputs and I need to consolidate. The, I don't think on a day to day Bitcoiner really needs to manage stuff in that way, especially with
Yeah.
Lightning. And I think some wallets like Samurai still have other issues because they have a lot more functionality on top of it. But this is really just like pure, when we're talking about Sparrow, it's just pure UTXO control and signature control. And it does feel like it's such a powerful tool to just give more knowledge to the user. And and to be honest, I don't use it so much on cold storage, because just I don't move much stuff on and off cold storage. But I do try to recover most of my wallets on Sparrow, if nothing else, just to see, to make sure that everything is working fine. And I wonder if you ever, so you mentioned Samurai has multiple signature schemes inside their wallet. For instance, I tried to recover the Bisq wallet on Sparrow once, and obviously now Bisq has pretty much like three signature schemes there. They have the legacy addresses, they have the new Back32 addresses, and then they also have the BSQ token, which is a colored coin. So obviously, I don't recommend anybody use Sparrow to control their Bisq or any other specific wallet that has a specific protocol. But it's so interesting to actually open it up and see everything that's happened and understand how the UTXOs are all organized and ready to be spent. And I wonder if you ever imagine moving forward allowing the user to create one single wallet with multiple, I guess, key stores of multiple types,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it is a tough one. You know, if it's very hard in the UI, if you go, for instance, to the sort of addresses and you see that there's a sequential list of IDs there. You know, it starts off with 0, 1, 2, 2, 3. Now you're going to have to change that UI quite a bit, because now obviously for index one, you're now going to have three different addresses for those three different schemes. So you can imagine that all of a sudden you now have this huge amount of complexity that the user has to now think about, and like which one do I actually want to receive to, and then every time you kind of show the user, they're going to have to drill down into those. I mean, it could be done. I'm just not sure it's worth it. I'm not sure the additional complexity there is worth it, as opposed to just having another tab. You know, I think that the tab-based interface that all sort of browsers have and Sparrow shares is a very powerful one, and sort of it's quite easy to fit your mind around that. You know, whether we want to kind of move everything into one tab as opposed to just having three tabs. You know, for sure there are pros and cons to both.
No, no, I tend to agree, and I only bring this up because I've been given the price of Bitcoin going up lately. There's a lot of people reaching out and kind of finally getting into Bitcoin, and for people that I sense they want to learn more and they're ready for understanding Bitcoin at a different level, I usually recommend them, okay, so now I think you're ready to Sparrow. Just check this out. Just import your seed words and test it out and just see if you can break something, and then we'll talk about it. And some users go and they try to recover wallets on Sparrow, and then they immediately see that, oh, I'm only finding funds on this script type and not on this script type. And I totally agree with you that the tab format is really appropriate for this use case. I was just thinking if there's a way to start pushing the idea that the wallet is actually based out of the seed words and not so much out of the derivation paths, which obviously very important to understand. But then you basically one wallet, one software treats one seed word, set of seed words as the primary kind of origin for the wallet, and then generates multiple different wallets with different address types in it. But then there's also the idea of still understanding the wallet as one single address. And I'm just having a hard time explaining that to new people, because I get the question a lot, what is a wallet? And then is it an address? Is it a seed word? Is it a seed words coupled with derivation paths? Is it seed words coupled with derivation paths and fingerprints to validate a passphrase? I guess I'm just also struggling myself a little bit how to find a better way to explain this.
Yeah, I mean, we have, as an industry, hugely overused the word wallet on far too many things, which adds a lot of confusion to users. I mean, one of the things that I did with Sparrow, which as far as I know is unique, is that you can edit your wallet after the fact. So most wallets, what they do is they have sort of a wizard-based approach where you get your seed words, or you enter your seed words, and you go through and you choose various things, and then you get your wallet, and that's kind of done. You don't get the ability to go back and actually make a sort of edit afterwards. And there are, as with all things, pros and cons to being able to allow people to sort of edit things. But I kind of, again, going back to the idea of a sort of IDE, I just kind of wanted to create a tool that allowed people to not feel like they were locked into a particular wallet setup, that you could go and try different things, you could revert back, you could, you had just this sort of general purpose tool that allowed you to, in a fairly easy to understand way, you can go across and create 3 different wallets and 3 different tabs, each with a different script type based off the same seed. Maybe what I should do is make it even easier and just have a button which says recreate this wallet with a different script type, and kind of put that there. But the idea is just to stay very close to the kind of nuts and bolts layer of Bitcoin, but at the same time allow people to change things easily, to not feel like once they're set up with a certain wallet that's kind of it, and the UI is not really making it easy to switch between wallets or to change whatever wallet setup you have. So that's that's some of the thinking that I've sort of had around that point.
As you were talking, I was just thinking that would be amazing to just be able to just duplicate a wallet with a different script type. Obviously, again, like you said, I'm not really sure if the effort is worth the reward. But it made me think about the auto detection tool that Electrum has now, and I wonder if you ever thought about also adding something like that, or do you think that that's gonna just bloat the code and that's the responsibility of the user to know that, and you want to keep it streamlined? Because I think that's a great example of a trade-off between ease of use and knowledge of the protocol, is allowing the user to just click a button and it goes through all the script types and finds which one has balance. But at the same time, you completely miss the opportunity of teaching the user that there are multiple script types and why potentially they're important.
I think it's a handy feature. I would definitely think about it. I don't really have a solid view on whether it should be done or not at this point. But I do see the value of it for sure. It definitely could save users time. One of the other thoughts that I've had, I don't know whether I'm right, but whenever there's a new technology that arrives, the default position that most people have is this thing is too hard to use, right? We've had it with everything for hundreds of years, right? Everything that arrives, this thing is too hard to use. It will never catch on. And I think that that's a very common view that people have around Bitcoin. But given time, people will learn, because if your wealth is in this thing, it's in your interest to understand it, to get to know what it is that you're doing. And I think much in the same way that we have, very common, if we think around the rise of mobile phones, which is really less than 20 years old at this point, and the amount of skill that almost all, people who have a smartphone, sure, it might not be, the majority of the world, but those people who've had a smartphone for a few years, and you think about the skill level that they have, Bitcoin's not really that complex that you couldn't reach the same skill level when it's your money involved. That's kind of also my thinking about it is we're just early, and trying to hide too much stuff from the user is, I think, a dangerous path, because your security is definitely impacted if you do that. You will reveal your privacy by sending a UTXO, for example, that tells people something about how much wealth you have. And you sort of might lose funds because they're in a script type that you didn't know you had. All of those sort of things, I think, are going to become easier with time. I think that we have a job as people working in the space to make it easier, but I don't think we should try and dumb it down too much to reduce that level of input from the user, because ultimately it's in their interest to know what's going on. And I do think that will happen over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the ongoing discussion of making stuff easier to use is a very slippery slope. Do you have any long-term plans on shifts that you want to take the project in, or a direction that you want to drive Sparrow for, and have it like a general set of features that you want to see added to the wallet?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that privacy is one area where definitely there's more things that can be done. So exactly how to do that, I think, is something I'm still trying to work through. I think that we've got some great tools as it stands, but I think many of them do have some issues. I do think that CoinJoin, as good as a tool as it is today, is likely to run into fee issues in future. It just seems hard to imagine how it won't, given that we all expect fees to go up over time. I do really like the use of page join, but the fact that the sort of standardized way of doing it requires a server endpoint. It isn't great, because you're not always paying a merchant. Often you just want to transfer from one wallet to the other. I particularly like privacy techniques that help everyone, so they kind of obfuscate the entire blockchain rather than just the participants of that particular technique. So for example, CoinJoin really only helps, or at least equal output CoinJoin certainly really only helps the users in that CoinJoin, which is great for them, but not so useful for everyone else. Whereas PayJoin breaks the common input ownership heuristic, which is just awesome for everyone, because it increases the doubt that all kind of privacy analysis has. So, I want to look at those sort of things. I need to spend some more time there and try and figure out, are there any privacy techniques that have a long time horizon, I think is really what I'm trying to find. What I don't want to do is put months of effort into something which becomes almost unusable in future because of various things that are relatively predictable in the Bitcoin network. I don't have any specific kind of views exactly what it will be at this point. I've just got some ideas on things that I want to look at sort of more. And then I guess from a transactions point of view, Lightning is definitely something I'd like to look at some point in future. I'm not rushing into it. I don't think that, I think that it's okay that we kind of focus on layer one for now and just make sure that that is really great. I don't want to spread myself too thin because Lightning is just a whole nother layer, and it might be best to actually do that just by kind of depending on some other piece of code which can sort of handle that sort of layer. But yeah, those are some general thoughts. We can dive into any of them more.
Regarding PayJoin, I wonder if there's more and more wallets that are connected to nodes, and I wonder if that endpoint that needs to be online to coordinate that transaction. I wonder if the advent of wallets like Sparrow that connect either to Electrum server or to the node, the same thing with Spectre. I'm just wondering if there's a way of thinking that maybe it doesn't need to be the merchant to coordinate the PayJoin, maybe because all these wallets are now coming online, they are connected to their own nodes, and potentially if there's a way to, I guess I don't fully understand how PayJoin works. Where does the coordination need to happen? Is it's whoever constructs the transaction, correct?
Yeah, so how it sort of works is that you would build your normal transaction, select the UTXOs or have the wallet do it for you, send to whatever the payment address is, and then you would then basically inside the payment URL, the sort of BIP21 URL, which contains the sort of address and the amount, there's also an HTTP address. And that HTTP address, you then say, right, here's the transaction that I've built, here's the PSBT, and the server then receives that, and then it adds to the transaction, basically creates a new one based off that, an extra UTXO on the sort of input side. So that then, and then they then sign that, they send it back to you, and then you then sign your side again. You have to actually sign twice. And then you can broadcast the transaction which has all of the inputs signed. So the one that the server has signed and the ones that you have signed. So it's a bit of a backwards and forwards. Yeah. That's how PageJoin works. The issue is the sort of HTTP endpoint. Obviously, only a server will have that. So the way that Samurai have overcome this is by having what they call Soroban, which is basically a peer-to-peer protocol, which effectively does the same thing. So it allows the PSBT to be passed backwards and forwards between two wallets, allow them both to sign their own inputs, and then for one to send it back. So they've built that, which is great. The one downside, if you can call it that, is that you obviously need some kind of an ID in order to know that you're talking to the right peer. And then they've based that ID, from what I understand, off the BIP 47, which means that you have to implement BIP 47 first. So, there's a few things there to be aware of, but certainly that's, I think, both wallets need to sort of be online at the same time, and they both have to be able to sign, which usually requires user input. So, there are some downsides to it, but it's a great thing if you can get it to sort of work.
Would it be mitigated by allowing like a Raspberry Pi node to serve as kind of their online presence? So for instance, imagine that a user connects their Sparrow wallet and I don't know, maybe with Xpub has a little program running online that's ready to accept and trigger something on Sparrow that will tell the user this transaction needs to be signed, so that coordination can happen at a different level. Would you be interested in trying to connect Sparrow wallets to other Sparrow wallets in a peer-to-peer network? I would imagine that would introduce a lot of new moving parts to the code.
Yeah, look, I mean, what I would really like is that we all had, all the wallet devs had some way of being able to do peer-to-peer PageJoins. That would be awesome. That's a standard kind of approach to doing that. I think would really just help everyone's privacy so much that, so long as we were able to convince users that it was worthwhile, because there is a slightly additional fee to pay for every new input that you add, right? So you do have to be aware of that. And then, as I say, the other downside is, even if you had this always on node, you still have to sign it, right? You still have to sign this additional input, which usually requires the user to be sitting there to say sign. Obviously, with certain approaches like cold cards, CK Bunker, you don't have to, right? But, and with BTC Pay Server, it kind of automatically signs it so long as you're using a hot wallet. But, the general case is that every wallet requests a user to sign. So maybe, there's a way for wallets to have a set of UTXOs, which are quite small, which they don't mind if the wallet signs on their behalf. I guess there's a number of ways to try and do it. I just think we need to work more on that sort of area. And the first steps are currently being taken, right, to kind of create this peer-to-peer network that allows the PSBTs to be transferred backwards and forwards. I think that's kind of almost the first step, and then we kind of need to get to easier use of that over time.
Would it be possible, for instance, to have a Sparrow Wallet, if you were to implement BIP47, to have a Sparrow Wallet interact with the Wasabi wallet and communicate via that peer-to-peer network and coordinate the PayJoin transaction?
Yeah, it's actually not the Wasabi, but the...
Sorry, Samurai.
Yeah, Samurai. So yes, look, there are a number of different... I don't obviously know for sure until it's done, but I have no reason to believe that it wouldn't work. There's sort of open source code. It's actually Java code, so there's every reason to believe that that should work. It's just a matter of being able to do all of those different things. You have to get the sort of user ID first, which, as I say, is a sort of BIP47 code or Paynum. I'm not quite sure which of the sort of two that they use, but that's, I think, the first step, is being able to get that going.
Where does exactly the reusable code come from? Is it derived from the key, or?
Oh, right. Yeah, so yes, it is. So basically what BIP47 does, in very simple terms, is it puts a payment, it puts a public key out there, which allows, without getting into the details, basically a Diffie-Hellman key exchange to take place. So then every time that takes place, the sort of person that you've done that key exchange with then has a unique address that they can send to. So then every time they want to send to you, they can then use what is effectively their own private XPub for your wallet to create a new address, and then they create a new address, and then they send to that address. So it's very, very cool. The downside of BIP47 is that it is just such a different way of doing things, that it requires quite a big wallet overhaul, not just from an internals point of view, but from a UI point of view as well. You've got all these random addresses that are per user rather than per sort of wallet. So it introduces a new layer there, where you now have to be aware of, not only do I have this seed with all of these addresses hanging off it, but now I have the seed with all of these users hanging off it, with all of these addresses hanging off it. So if you can imagine, that's another whole thing. And that's, I think, one of the major reasons why BIP47 hasn't seen the adoption that many would like, is just the fact that many wallets, even to the admission of the BIP47 author, would need a complete overhaul to be able to support that kind of change.
Yeah, I can see a lot of issues arising. In terms of coin joining, what would be the ideal implementation for you to have Sparrow kind of come into that space? Would it be to connect to an existing protocol, fork, or develop your own coin join protocol, or try to connect it to a market? In your opinion, what would be the best, more user-friendly and more beneficial scenario to have Sparrow interact with coin joins?
Yeah, as I say, I'm still not convinced that coin joins are going to be a practical, way to do things in future. I think we all expect fee rates to go up over time. I think they're still amazingly low. We've come a long way from 2017, where we had a full mempool with far less on-chain activity that we do today. But there's only so long that the optimizations that have been put in the last 2 or 3 years are going to work for, and Bitcoin users just grow every day, and there's only so much block space that's not going to change. the reality is that the mempool is just going to become a more and more contested space. The fee rates are going to go up, and there are various methods to bring coin join fees down, which are going to require soft forks. But as it stands now, I think we're just lucky to have cheap coin joins, and people should use them. But I'm not sure that it's going to be something we can be doing in a year or two. Are you going to be prepared to spend $1,000 on a coin join, or 2,000 or 3,000? It's going to start to possibly getting priced out for smaller amounts. So I might be wrong on that, but I battle to see how it plays out in a different way. So from that point of view, I'm not sure that it's worthwhile for me to start building a different coin join algorithm. That's a huge amount of work, and clearly not a simple thing to do right. There is a possibility to join one of the others, but again, it's quite a lot of work, and I'm not sure that it's going to work well forever. And as I was saying, the one thing about CoinJoin that I don't like is the fact that it only helps the people in the CoinJoin versus everyone else on the sort of chain who do benefit from other approaches.
I think I agree with everything you said, but I do still think it's important to have users conjoin and making it easier. I'm mostly asking this because I would love to have a wallet that exposes everything and shows everything, and it's like, okay, this is all I need to do all my Bitcoin stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of time required to implement a lot of these things, and there's problems with the protocols. There's no perfect, obvious solution to do any of this, but I do feel like once you're in that send screen, you should be able to see, I should not touch these coins, I need to join these coins, and these coins are ready. And before you spend, if that becomes the habit of, I need to make sure that I sort my outputs and I know them before I spend them, that to me is the best implementation of this protocol, because it puts everything in the user's minds and it doesn't allow them to be distracted by anything. And I totally see your issue with the fees, although I imagine that the fees are going to rise for everything. So at some point, I think users are going to look at CoinJoin and think, does this service provide enough of a value for me? And I think in the end, they will just mix bigger amounts of Bitcoin and will be just a little bit more nervous. But I think that's just how it's going to evolve. Even though pay joins can solve a lot of stuff, I still think that CoinJoins are going to be around for a while. That's just my 2 cents. I might be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, no, look, I think you're right. I think that they will be. I'm certainly not saying that they're going to go anywhere. And again, just to be clear, I think that they're a great tool, and people should definitely use them. But in terms of whether Sparrow should go down that particular path, as builders in the space, we always need to be saying, well, what other approaches are there? How can we build something new? How can we think about things in a different way? If you want to coin join, there's some good options today. They do require a hot wallet. That's the other thing that I don't really like about it. Sparrow is obviously much more focused on the cold wallet, on the hardware wallets. Is there an approach there that kind of talks more towards that side of things? That's kind of where my mind goes, is to kind of leverage the strengths of it. Because, one thing, I hate doing is moving funds out of cold storage into a hot wallet. That for me is a uncomfortable and unpleasant experience. So I'd really like to try and see if there isn't something we can do which doesn't require that. It may be dreams, but that's kind of what I'd like to put some more effort into.
Yeah, I don't know either, but it's good to at least have someone thinking about it, because I believe the solution is out there somewhere, and someone just needs to start really breaking this down and seeing what's possible. Actually, this brings up another. Are you developing Sparrow all by yourself, or do you have a lot of contributions on GitHub? Do you have a team, or is it mostly you taking stuff from GitHub from other users that come in and out? What's the team protocol for Sparrow?
So in terms of the code, it's pretty much been me. I think I actually merged the first kind of non-documentation PR today. So, it's starting to, yeah, thanks. But it's, one thing I can say is the amount of user feedback that has gone into it has been huge. There's, I've probably been busy now for 3 or 4 months with, 80% of the work I'm doing just based on basically feedback from users saying this would be great. And for the most part, some really awesome ideas. So, it's been the last period has been a period of lots of polish and just trying to get things to work well for everyone on every platform, and going back into a lot of areas and building them again, and just making sure that the code's very clean and can handle, the layers that are going to come on top. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and yeah, as I say, from a team point of view, it's pretty much me. I don't necessarily want it to be only me forever. It's been great working with the likes of Sheshik, who built the BWT, the Bitcoin wallet tracker that Sparrow uses to connect to a node. So that's been awesome, and there is sort of a network of other devs, and we all talk. But in terms of the actual code itself, it's pretty much been looking at it from my point of view.
It's amazing what one individual can do in Bitcoin just by sitting in the computer with some kind of frustration with a different project or with the lack of a different project, and you can just take some time and start building something that everybody will want to use eventually. It's really beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about, just having absolute control over everything that is quite useful, I guess. One of the sort of dangers of any project, particularly I think an open source one, is that when it comes to UI, everyone has different ideas, and there are some answers that are more right than others, but often there's no like single right answer. You can do it this way or that way. So then the most important thing is just to make sure that you do things in a consistent way throughout the app. So once somebody gets used to the app, they know where to find a similar thing because it was built in a certain way, and that way is just being carried out. So that's something that I've focused on a lot, and I've kind of used the fact that I'm the only dev working on it to really make sure that that I do things in that way. However, I've had plenty of users come and say, listen, you need to make this field look like this because it's actually a disabled field and it shouldn't look like you can edit the field. No, those sorts of things, which is great. I don't get it 100% right either every time, but as I say, the user feedback has just been awesome. I've had people, looking at all areas and, just doing pure sort of UI based reviews, which is great. That's some of the hardest stuff. I always think that the UI based stuff is the stuff that's really hard to get right. Often you need 3 or 4 goes at a thing before you finally figure out, this is the way that makes sense. It's not an obvious thing.
Yeah, as the project lead maintainer or owner or whoever has the ability to merge pull requests, for instance, for requests from users on UI, do you like them to come just verbally? Have you ever had like other designers trying to change the app a little bit and sending you screenshots? What is usually the best process for you to get the change, understand it?
Yeah, look, I guess the best way would be a proposed design. That would certainly make the most sense. I think one of the things that is, kind of the best way is to use GitHub. It just allows things to be tracked over time, and it's much better than trying to do it via DM or whatever. But I don't actually mind, so long as I get that feedback and I can use it, it doesn't matter too much. One of the things that I think is I guess both again a pro and a con is that it's quite hard to unless you are the lead dev who's kind of built everything, it's quite hard to understand sometimes why you can't go and add this certain feature or make things look a different sort of way. Often there are good reasons why they're built in a certain way, and a change, if you do make a change, has to then take into account re-architecting a whole lot of other things because they obviously hang off it. So it's, I certainly don't implement every piece of feedback that I get. I think that would be a huge mistake, but I do try and listen to everyone and try and understand where they're coming from, because there's always truth in it. You know, if somebody's battled with a certain thing, there's always a reason for it. And as a dev, you'd be making a mistake not to try and think about it, even if you don't fix it in the way that seems obvious.
It really requires a lot of thinking to get the user in a contributor mindset, and also taking the time to issue requests in a more pertinent way, because sometimes people just spontaneously ask for a feature and then they forget about it, and then they get frustrated because that feature has not been implemented, and the conversation or the justification for that feature not to be implemented is lost. And even though I love GitHub and I think it's great to track everything, but it's very overwhelming to a lot of people that have great ideas but can't express them to the project leads and help them understand how to make their product better for the user base. And I've been trying to come up with ways to allow new users to understand and to take advantage of this. A lot of times I have a frustration with software. I go on GitHub, I take a screenshot and some annotations. I just propose a different design. It very rarely gets implemented, but at least it starts the conversation. It helps me at least also understand there's all these technical blockers and security blockers that don't allow it. Moving on to the next thing, and maybe next time my proposal will be a little bit more implementable.
Sure. I mean, you know, one of the things, as I was saying, no dev likes to spend their time answering user sort of support. So you generally try and think of, how can I never have to answer this particular question again? And then you just build things around that. Yeah, so that's certainly something that I've tried to follow. But you know, there are certain things that you build in a certain way, and you just accept that people might have to ask, I guess.
And how do you work on other projects, or are you devoted to Sparrow full time? What is your day-to-day life when it comes to developing?
Yeah, it's pretty much, you know, I think to try and spread yourself too thin is not going to work. Sparrow is certainly enough. There are one or two sub projects that I do maintain. For instance, there's one called Hummingbird, which implements the uniform resource, or the sort of QR code spec that is the default now and gradually getting adopted by the hardware wallets for QR code transmission, which will be great because, you know, I think the chances of us having a, you know, apart from PSBT, sort of a default wallet import and export format on a text level, you know, who knows, perhaps we'll get that in future, but certainly from a QR point of view, there's really been some great work done by the Blockchain Commons team. And I've written a Java implementation of that work, which Sparrow obviously uses, and I think is now starting to be used by a few others as well. So that's kind of one of the other things that I do. That doesn't really take up much sort of time. It's mostly, you know, doing the kind of Sparrow work, and then, you know, kind of trying to contribute to the various standards-based talk online, and making sure that wherever it's going, you know, from my sort of own point of view anyway, it sort of makes sense and is headed in a way that I think wallets should be headed.
And in the long term, I would imagine that you've added a donation page on your website. I don't know if recently, but at least, like, I would say in the last 5 months. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd say that's about, probably a little less actually, but around that sort of time.
Which I think it's great. I've seen more and more projects do that, and just giving an opportunity of the users to give back some value. It's in a very egotistical way. The reason why I donate to all these projects is to pay your time to actually focus on that specific project, to not have you be distracted with anything else, so I can have a better wallet software, obviously. And I'm wondering if you see viability on making this your whole life project donation based, or if you think that it's going to be really complicated to actually bring this to be like the only source of income, so you can really focus on that single project. Do you see that happening on the open source field in
Yeah,
general?
I kind of think that once you start something and it has legs, like I think Sparrow does, that you have to see it through. That's kind of been, you know, the way I've done my career. This is my third major kind of career, I don't know, project that I've done, and you know, every one of them has lasted more than a decade in terms of sort of application of focus and yeah, I mean, it is true that the donations that I get are certainly not enough to support a sort of a normal life, if you will, but that's okay for now. I think that it will grow with time. I also think that there are sort of the likes of sort of enterprise level grants that may come in. However, one thing that I am very sure of is that I'm only ever going to build Sparrow in a way that makes sense to me. I'm not going to try and, you know, be influenced by someone else who wants to build a certain feature if I don't think that it's a way that it should be built. And for me, it's really about making a Bitcoin wallet. You know, it's you know, in the most true sense of that word. Yeah, it's a long-term thing. I do hope that it does get more, you know, financial support in future, but either way, I'm going to keep doing this for quite a long time to come. So yeah, those are my thoughts on it.
I'm just repeating myself at this point, but I think it's an amazing project. Sometimes when I'm trying to explain Bitcoin to other people, depending on their level, I just open up a test wallet that I have for Sparrow, and I just go through a transaction. I love the anatomy of the transaction tab, where you can just see in the hex format what is what. I was wondering if you were ever considered, in the same way that you have that inspector on the bottom with the color-coded hex for the transaction, it would be great to be able to actually even break it down even further and to understand exactly what's happening there. I know that you have that code there, and on the top you have a little bit of what it means, but sometimes I find it would be amazing to be able to hover on those color-coded hexes and to understand, okay, this is the opcode, this is the signature, this is, I don't know.
Yeah,
And
sure. I think that that's a great idea. Yeah, what I mean, there's a part to Sparrow which I really hope in future gets used for sort of education. I do think, you know, we've got you know, wouldn't it be great if we had courses in Bitcoin and not just the sort of high level stuff, but going all the way down, and then the sort of educator could fire it up and show people this is how a transaction works, and, you know, show them the hex level of the things, because that's really how you sort of do it. You know, if we look to the future and where we think the network's going to go, it's probably going to be the fact that layer one is going to only be comprised of high value transactions, because the fees will be high enough that you won't, you know, send a small amount. So therefore, every transaction that you send is going to be what we would think of like a major cold storage movement today, like one where you sweat and you check everything 5 times, and you know, it seems to me that Bitcoin layer one is going to go that way. And then I think we're going to have lots of people out there in the world who are checking things all the way down to a byte level, because any mistake could cost, you know, a lot of money. So that was one of the ideas that I had right from the start, was just be able to allow people to go down and check all the way down to that base layer. And if you are skilled in the way that Bitcoin transactions are built, you can then you can just kind of go through it. And ultimately you trust your own eyes, right? You don't even need to broadcast with the same wallet that created it. You can go down and you can see, hey, you know, did the transaction that I just created, does the on the byte level, does it actually correspond to the thing that I intended to create? And I mean, that's going to sound mad to most people right now, but if there's millions or hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, maybe it's not so mad. You know, maybe having that education, which is not that hard really to get, and to be able to just see what's going on and to do that kind of manual check, you know, that's how you really know that your wallet software hasn't been compromised or whatever. You know, there's a lot there on that layer that you can just make sure of before you actually send it out.
I'm gonna disagree with you, because I actually use that feature even for like $3 transactions. I like to see it all the time, and
Oh, awesome.
I use every single transaction to try to learn a little bit more about Bitcoin and try to learn a little bit more about controlling outputs. And that's one of the reasons Why sometimes when I'm on the transaction tab and I want to know exactly what's in the hex code, because I've been trying to understand this for a long time, I also know that the hex doesn't necessarily need to match the address, for instance. And I've had confusions where I was on that tab or other people were on that tab, and it's like I don't see the sending address anywhere. It's like, yeah, you're not going to really see that sending address anywhere because it's going to be encoded in a different way. And that's where I kind of hit the wall. And I know that there's little Indian and big Indian and different encodings. And that's why I would make it so much more useful to see that highlighted part of the transaction and be able to hover and say, okay, I now know what this is, even though for now it's just gibberish. In the same way that you have a lot of tooltips already, which are really helpful, because in the end, what enables you to have less user questions is exposing the right information in the right place without overbearing the UI. So it's not everything is a question, but I don't know, you probably know this better than anyone, where to strike that balance between giving too much information, when to give that information, and when not to give that information.
Yeah, well, I think you actually put it very, very well there. That's you do have to do it in a way that kind of exposes the information, but almost in a gradual way. So somebody gets a fairly light amount of information, but if they want to dig deeper, that point where they can dig is sort of intuitive, that it's an easy place or the sort of obvious place to click on. And then as you dive further into it, that things just kind of unfold. That's the sort of ideal that I'm working towards. It's not always easy, but I think you
Mhm.
describe it well.
It's definitely one of the projects I use the most currently, and it's really, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing for you, but it actually is. It's changing the way I visualize Bitcoin. Just the diagram you have, the hex color codes, even adding the mempool information to the send tab. I think you're actually influencing a lot of the way a lot of Bitcoiners actually think about Bitcoin, which I think is really good because sometimes I myself get really overwhelmed and scared because I lost track of the UTXOs.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that I really wanted to do was to make sure that if you update something somewhere in the wallet, that update is carried across everywhere, right? That you don't then have a part of the wallet that is out of date, which is actually much harder to do than you think, right? Because you don't, like a browser, you have like a page refresh model often where you go back to the server and then you ask the server and it just says, well, this is the new sort of UI state and everything just gets changed. But when you have a desktop UI framework, you actually have to go and update all of the different fields that might correspond to that particular change. So making sure that that happens is very important to me, because if you don't, then user will lose confidence in the wallet and they'll be like, well, I thought I changed this thing and now it doesn't look like it's changed, and what's going on here. So that was that is and remains a major thing that I try to get right. It sounds obvious, it sounds like something that you should just do, and it is, but it's actually far harder than you might think, because you're not kind of refreshing the entire UI state every time. You have to think about every area whenever something, whether it's coming off the network, whether it's a change to the wallet, a label change, whatever it is, it must update everywhere. As soon as it's made, it mustn't require a wallet restart or some other user, sort of function to go and make sure that that thing is different. So yeah, that's just one of the other areas that I thought I'd mention, because it's been a big challenge, but it's, I think, been very worthwhile.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited for the next iterations of the wallet. I'm going to keep using it. I actually had a presentation showing how the hex of the transaction breaks down and trying to visualize the outputs and the inputs in the same way that you did with like a graph format. But ever since I became more confident about using Sparrow. I actually use Sparrow to show a live transaction in the making, because it is also very important for, I think, to understand Bitcoin, is that nothing is really happening on the wallet besides crafting and signing the transaction. Everything is actually happening on the blockchain. I love having Sparrow next to mempool and next to maybe even an Electrum with the same wallet, and say we're all seeing the same things, Some can act on it, some can't. Some are just for seeing, some are for writing. But as long as you have your seed words, everything is the same. And this is the information Sparrow gives you. This is the information Electrum hides from you, and this is the information even more out in the open. And I think having that ability to explain that to other people and having them then take on Sparrow and create wrong wallets, remake them, and understanding what is exactly changing when you change the derivation path. I think it's amazing. Even just the scanning of the transactions in the beginning, going through the derivation path, is so helpful to understand that actually we're now scanning all the addresses as opposed to just having a loading bar and suddenly the seeds are converted into a balance. You actually
All right. Yeah. That's
showing everything.
interesting.
It just helps people understand a lot more because they come from a bank balance universe, and understanding this more as loose coins in the blockchain, and all these coins are coming from one single seed. It takes a it takes a while to understand that. I think I'm
It
still
does. Yeah.
struggling with these ideas.
Yeah. It does. It does.
I really think that Sparrow really helps with that personally, and I think for everybody else coming in. I hope I find more ways to contribute to this project, because I really feel like this is the wallet I would have designed for myself, and I just didn't because I couldn't. And I'm very glad someone else did, and in such a beautiful and informative way. So I really appreciate the time you've put into this, and I actually hope that in the future Bitcoiners can understand that this value didn't just appear from anywhere, and they can actually go to your website and help you sustain the project and have more of your time dedicated to it, obviously for compensation via donation.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you. Those are very kind words. Yeah. I mean, I built the wallet ultimately for myself first. That won't change. I just wanted to, work really well, as I was saying, for a Bitcoiner to secure their coins and know what it is that they're doing. So yeah, that's going to remain the sort of goal in the future.
Yeah. And do you have any kind of call to action to anybody that's working on design in Bitcoin or any other wallets where obviously they can
Yeah, I mean,
find?
I think the one thing that is not being talked about enough in the space is people using Bitcoin wallets in browsers. I really worry about that. On the one hand, it's kind of common for Bitcoiners to look at Android phones and look at Google and all of the information that they take, and even just look at the browsers on their own and say, well, don't use this browser because, for example, Chrome, because it, scrapes a whole lot of information. And then on the other hand, there's not really a lot of discussion about the fact that so many wallets depend on browsers, and usually the browser developed by Google. That concerns me. It just seems like there's a bit of a break in thinking there, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So, I would advise people don't use a browser to do your cold storage. I don't think that that's the right way of thinking about it. It might be fine, but the chances that there's some ability to slip some code into there, which is going to, leak your privacy or whatever, it's real. And certainly, I was very surprised, and I'm still surprised that people are using browser-based wallets as widely as they are. So yeah, I think that it's just something that needs to be talked about more. I'm not going to try and lead the charge on that. I've got enough things to do, but
Yeah.
I do sort of mention it from time to time because I do worry about that, and I'm talking mainly here about cold storage wallets.
To be honest, I hadn't even crossed my mind because that would never. I mean, that would defeat the whole purpose. But I understand now that you talk about it. I've seen people use, like, for instance, Spectre on a browser. I've used it on a browser when I was testing it out, but definitely when I started moving any any Bitcoin in there out of a test, then definitely recommend using the client, or yeah, or even using maybe a different browser that's not like one of these gigantic browsers that already has a lot of extensions. I think in the end it's always about the amount of lines of code and the complexity of the code. If it's too complex, it's going to be really hard to be verified. And to be honest, I never went through the full code of Sparrow, and that's unfortunate because I try to review the code of all the projects I use. Unfortunately, sometimes I look at it and I just simply do not understand it. But when I see projects, not necessarily even related to Bitcoin, but when they start adding new libraries, new frameworks, and then stuff starts breaking, when you're dealing with a game or something, it's not it's okay. You just go in and you fix it. But when you're dealing with Bitcoin, anything that breaks is potentially a signature that becomes invalid and UTXOs that are destroyed. So
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about privacy because I personally I'm just moving Bitcoin around to myself most of the time. But there is, the more lines of code, the more sketchy I feel. And
Yeah, so I mean, you should be aware that if you use even the client Spectre ships with, you're using the Chromium browser, the sort of browser
mhm.
engine that Google Chrome is built on, and it is a very complex, you know, project. Basically, all of the rendering, just there's millions and millions of lines of code there being updated by a very large team, and I have no reason to believe that it isn't a very good team, but it's still, as you were saying, a very complex thing, which and I mean, these things are not black and white, but yeah, as I was saying, I was just really surprised at the technical choice of a browser front end for a cold storage, intended wallet. For me, that's a strange choice.
I don't disagree, but I also think there's a space for it because there are just a lot of users that would be fully excluded if they didn't go that route, I think. And I'm not even talking about using the client and still using Chromium. Just being able to test it in the browser really fast, it's actually, I think, a great benefit because that's how I started using it. It was just like, okay, another wallet. I'm running out of time in my day to test wallets, but I'll give this one a go. And they made it so simple that it enabled me a little bit to get some confidence and say, okay, this is actually going to be really good for the wider consumer base.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, that's that's good. The worry that I have is as the balances in there grow, is it still the right place?
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It also feels like you're going into extreme privacy and security concerns, and which I think are totally reasonable. I share them, not necessarily in this case because it never really crossed my mind. The way, for instance, I use Cold Card, I'm actually going to start looking into Cold Core because it also feels like it's been compacted into the least amount of codes and it has no dependencies besides Python, and it becomes very hard to use because it's so reduced, but at the same time it was made to be easy to install and easy to verify, which for me it's also a use case because something can be beautiful and easy to use but hard to verify, it's not going to help you in the long term. And if it's being captured by crazy autocorrect libraries from Chromium or whatever, that's equally bad. So I can totally
Yeah.
understand your concern.
Yeah, I think it's possible to always make things easier to use over time, but it's really difficult to undo a technical choice that you've made at the start and say, okay, well, we're not going to do it that way anymore. That's just on sort of it's you can iteratively increase the ease of use, but you can't iteratively change a major kind of technical design choice that you've made at the very start. Or at least it's very hard to do the latter. So that's kind of, I would rather start with the right hard choices at the start and make things easier to use over time by, kind of education or UI or whatever. But I think you need to start in the right place.
It feels like you started exactly in the right place and it's going in the right direction, at least for me. I think you have a very satisfied user, and I intend to keep using Sparrow for the near future as the way I interact with my UTXOs. So, yeah, thanks again for that, and thanks again for creating this. I think I think that's all on my end. Do you, besides letting people know to go to Sparrow, what's the website?
Yeah,
Sparrowwallet.com.
that's it. Yeah. So website sparrowwallet.com. The Twitter handle is at Sparrow Wallet, and my Twitter is at Craig Raw, all one word.
I look forward to the next updates, and I hope I can find some time and opportunity and ideas to contribute to the project, because the same way that you created this for yourself, I want to help also for myself, and I hope everybody wants to be involved and make good contributions and good proposals to improve the project for everyone, even for yourself, if you're willing to accept other humble suggestions, hopefully.
Always great. No, I certainly am, and thanks very much. It's been great to have a chat about the more sort of UI things, because they don't often get talked about. And yeah, so thanks for having this podcast, which allows us to get more into that sort of thing. I think it's very important.
Of course, thank you. I love it. I love talking about it. It's the two things I talk about is design and Bitcoin. So thank you for indulging me.
Awesome, great stuff.
Bye, Craig. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Pedro.